I loved Anki. I think it's a fantastic tool, and I think it is very helpful to use at SGU. In Term 1, extremely helpful. I think it's a great tool. I think really every student should use it. And even though it's a little tricky to understand in the beginning, you gotta use it. So I'm gonna break down how many cards I made for Term 1. So for exam number 1, FTM 1, I made 822 cards. Now, that is the easiest exam that you're gonna take. It's really just review of the things that you should already know, for the most part. And it's also kind of a short exam cycle, kind of light on material. They're just trying to build you up, so obviously, lowest amount of cards. Now, FTM 2, same amount of time, still basic information, but I went a little crazy. I realized that after the first exam, you need to pay attention to every single little detail, because those little details show up. A lot of them will show up. And you never know which ones. So it became more imperative for me to take note of little things that could come up on the exam. So MSK, highest number of cards, 2,341 cards. For the most part, it's a big number because the MSK module is the longest. It was, I believe, 4 weeks, somewhere around there. And this also includes a little bit of the lab exam that you're gonna take at the end of the semester. I just put it in that same time because that's when we're learning a bulk of the lab stuff. CPR, I went back down to 2,041 cards. That was for about 3 weeks of work, and it's about same thing, about 3.5 weeks, 3 weeks of work. My number went down to 1,981, roughly similar to the other CPR. But at this point, I actually had a little bit of the lab exam questions that you're gonna see at the end of the semester, as well as the OCEX. So technically this deck was probably the smallest for the CPR exam for the main reason that I just got more efficient at making cards. And the grand total came out to 8,638 cards. Now, it's good to consider totals and it's good to consider how many cards you're making. Don't necessarily shoot for a certain number, but from what I saw in myself is that the more cards you make, the better the grade you get. And that definitely happened with these ones. I did much better on this exam and I made a lot more cards. And it's really important. You gotta take note of every single little detail. That's how it works. So the way I used Anki is I really used it as my notes. So when I was an undergrad, for the most part, I took notes and that's how I studied. And I tried to do that first week in this exam. I realized really quickly that taking notes was ridiculous because everything was going really fast. They pack in a lot of information. And then when I was trying to read through my notes and then make Anki cards from those, I found that I would forget things. So for me, what was the most effective was I would go through the recordings at usually just regular speed. I tried to go fast in the beginning, but I would just go regular speed. That was the most effective. And I would just very slowly go through, try to totally understand what they're saying, and then make an Anki card. Now the downside of doing this, the real downside is since you haven't gone completely through the lecture, you may find that the information at the beginning of the lecture is just kind of building you up to stuff later in the lecture. So there's a trade-off. You need to be kind of aware that you may not be getting the big picture early on. So a really effective way to use Anki is to incorporate images. And I would say use images from lectures. The biggest, probably the most effective way to use images is for histology. You're gonna get a lot of histology, a lot of different kind of cells, a lot of different tissues, and just make a lot of different images. I would just take a photo, screenshot of that cell, put it in the Anki, and just ask, what's this? What's this? What's this? Or what's the function? What's this? What's this? And do multiple different versions of the same cell photo, if you can, just so that you get used to seeing different versions of that same cell or same tissue. That's what I found was really effective, and it doesn't take very much time to do it that way, especially since they're just straight image cards and just identifying. You'll fly through them super fast. Great way to use for anatomy. In the anatomy lab exam, images are fantastic. What's this? What's this? Perfect. Really useful. This is kind of strange, but what was really effective for me with images is when we were studying all the different types of diseases. And for me, I would find the images that were probably the most disturbing or the most shocking, where the person really looks like they're suffering. You know, what is the most extreme version of that disease, you know? Like just giving an example, spina bifida, where you see the brain coming out of the head or the spine coming out of the spinal cord. For me, it was really easy to memorize those things because the images were so shocking and they stuck in my brain, and it kind of hit an emotional part where you feel really bad for the person. And because emotion is linked with that image, it just retains so much stronger. So that was really effective for me. I know it seems a little dark, but it totally helped. Now, one thing I wish I did more of is organizing the information so it made it easier to find stuff. Because with 8,000 flashcards and you're trying to look up some piece of information, because I use this for my notes, so this is the only way I could keep track of all the information that I'd taken in. It's just easier if I had organized the material better. Anki has a nice way of being able to search. I mean, you can search like a combination of terms and they'll come up, but it'd be better to use really good tags that, like, say, okay, lecture 1, give the title of what that lecture is, or DLA 43, give the title. What are you learning? You're learning insulin, okay, DLA 27, insulin and glucagon, or something like that. So use tags, good tags. A good way of writing cards is to make them challenging, but not too challenging. In the beginning, I was making really challenging cards that had a lot of information, and this is what everybody's gonna do. You're gonna make really hard cards, and it's gonna take you forever to go through the deck because you're missing questions because you wrote the question too challenging. I think it's important to be a little nice to yourself, because granted, you're gonna go through a lot of different pieces of information, so you don't wanna be too nice, you don't wanna be like asking simple questions. It should like kind of jar your memory. I wish I came up with this technique, is making multiple choice questions for myself. So say if you're trying to memorize drugs and it's just hard for you to just straight memorize the word and say it correctly, and you'd get that card wrong. So the multiple choice is really nice because, one, it has the name in that group, so like you don't have to get the name correct. You're not getting the card wrong because you're not saying it completely correct. You can see the word and know that that's the right answer because that's how an actual exam is going to go. But the second benefit is that as you're putting in answers to try to trick you, you're kind of training your brain to know like what kind of questions you could be asked on an exam. And to think about how SGU is going to change their questions and how they're going to create questions for you. So these are my biggest pieces of advice. I hope these were helpful, and I hope you can take this advice and go into term 1 and go kick some booty.